The Quiet Woman's Final Move. Part 1. The Silence Before Thunder. The mahogany coffin gleamed under the soft candlelight of St. Andrew's Church, surrounded by white lilies that perfumed the air with the heavy sweetness of morning. 200 people sat in ancient pews, dressed in black, their faces etched with the particular grief that comes when death arrives decades too early. The autumn sun filtered through stained glass windows, casting fractured rainbows across the polished wood, beautiful and cruel, like a promise that had been broken. Inside that coffin lay Rachel Morrison, 32 years old. Elementary school teacher, 8 months pregnant when she died, mother to a daughter she would never hold. But here is what nobody in that church understood. Yet Rachel Morrison was not a victim. She was an architect of justice, a chess master who had spent 6 years positioning her pieces while everyone around her mistook her silence for surrender. The woman in that coffin had built a $47 million empire, while her husband believed she was making worksheets about butterflies. She had documented every lie, every betrayal, every crime committed against her, and she had arranged for the truth to be revealed at the one moment when escape would be impossible. Her own funeral. There is a particular kind of power that belongs only to those who have been underestimated. It is the power of invisibility, of being dismissed so thoroughly that you can build an entire kingdom in plain sight, while your enemies see nothing but a harmless, ordinary woman. Rachel understood this power better than anyone. She had wielded it like a weapon for years. And now, from beyond the grave, she was about to demonstrate exactly what happens when you mistake a woman's gentleness for weakness. I know this because I was there. My name is Claire Bennett, and Rachel Morrison was my best friend for 25 years. I was the one she chose to carry her secrets, to protect her daughter, and to ensure that every person who had ever wronged her would face the consequences of their cruelty. This is the story of how a dead woman got the perfect revenge. But more than that, it is a story about something we all need to understand. The quietest people in any room are often the most dangerous, not because they are violent or cruel, but because they are watching, learning, and preparing for a moment that no one else can see coming. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the church creaked open, and the sound echoed through the sanctuary like a gunshot. Every head turned. The priest stopped mid-sentence, his words about God's eternal plan dissolving into stunned silence. Marcus Morrison walked into his wife's funeral like a man attending an inconvenient business meeting. His charcoal Armani suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His expression held the careful arrangement of grief that someone might practice in a mirror, convincing enough for strangers, transparent to anyone who knew him. But it wasn't Marcus who made 200 people gasp in unison. It was the woman holding his hand. Jessica Crane entered that church as if she belonged there, as if walking into a dead woman's funeral on the arm of her husband was the most natural thing in the world. She was 28, blonde in that expensive salon way, beautiful in that manufactured Instagram influencer way. Her black designer dress was tailored to showcase her figure while maintaining the thinnest veneer of funeral appropriateness. Her red-soled Louboutin heels clicked against the marble floor with each step, a sound that felt obscene in the sacred silence. She was the other woman, the Mistress, and she had just walked into a church where 200 people knew exactly who she was and what she had done. Behind me, I heard a sound I will never forget. Betty Johnson, Rachel's mother. A woman who had worked double shifts at a truck stop diner for 30 years to give her daughter a better life let out a cry of pure anguish. It was the sound of something breaking inside a person, the sound of grief compounded by betrayal until it becomes too heavy to carry. Her legs gave out. I caught her before she hit the floor, holding her frail body as she sobbed against my shoulder. Through my tears, I watched Marcus lead his mistress to the front row of the church, to the seats reserved for family, and sit down without a single glance at the woman who had raised the wife he was burying. In that moment, I learned something that has stayed with me ever since when a person shows you who they really are during a crisis, during a moment when basic human decency should be the absolute minimum requirement. You need to believe them. Marcus wasn't cruel because of grief or shock or confusion. This was Marcus Morrison finally removing the mask he had worn for years. This was his true face, and every person in that church was seeing it clearly for the first time. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the pews like wildfire. I saw phones emerging from bags and pockets, even at a funeral, even in a church. People couldn't resist documenting the spectacle. Within minutes, the whole disgraceful scene would be spreading across social media, through text messages, through the invisible networks of gossip that connect us all. And Rachel's coffin sat silent, waiting for what came next. Part 2. The Girl from Nowhere. To understand how we arrived at this moment with a mistress sitting in the family pew and a dead woman's secrets, about to explode like a bomb, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to a trailer park in rural Tennessee, where a girl named Rachel Ann Johnson first learned that the world doesn't give you anything for free. Betty Johnson raised her daughter alone. There was never a father in the picture, never a man to share the burden of making ends meet on a waitress's salary. Their trailer was small but clean, filled with books that Betty bought at yard sales and thrift stores because she understood that knowledge was the one thing nobody could ever take from her daughter. Rachel was brilliant from the start. Her teachers noticed it immediately the way she absorbed information like a sponge. The questions she asked that were far too sophisticated for her age. The quiet determination in her eyes when she faced a problem she didn't yet know how to solve. By middle school, her guidance counselors were calling Betty to discuss scholarships and college opportunities, painting pictures of futures that seemed impossibly bright for a girl from the wrong side of the tracks. That child could be anything, they said. She just needs a chance. Betty was going to make sure Rachel got that chance. She picked up extra shifts whenever she could, cleaning houses for the wealthy families across town who barely acknowledged her existence. She stuffed cash into coffee cans and under mattresses, building a safety net, one crumpled dollar at a time. She went without new clothes, without vacations, without any of the small luxuries that make life bearable, because every dollar she didn't spend on herself was a dollar that might help her daughter escape the poverty that had defined her own life. There is a lesson in Betty's sacrifice that we often overlook sometimes. The greatest acts of love are invisible. They happen in the quiet moments when no one is watching, in the extra shift taken. The dream deferred, the comfort denied so that someone else might have a chance. Betty Johnson never expected praise or recognition. She simply did what needed to be done, day after day, year after year, until her daughter stood on the threshold of a future she had earned through talent and her mother had purchased through quiet, relentless sacrifice. Rachel earned a full scholarship to the University of Virginia. When she opened the acceptance letter, she and her mother held each other in their tiny kitchen and cried tears of joy and relief and the overwhelming knowledge that everything they had worked for had finally paid off. She arrived at college with 2 suitcases, $300, and a determination that bordered on ferocity. While her wealthy classmates complained about their dormitory accommodations and their parents' unreasonable expectations. Rachel was working 3 jobs waitressing at a diner where spoiled students never tipped well, tutoring other students in economics and business subjects she had taught herself from library books, and cleaning dormitories on weekends, scrubbing toilets for people who would never bother to learn her name. She graduated with a 4.0 GPA, summa cum laude, with the respect and admiration of every professor who had watched her fight for her education. And it was there, during her senior year, that she met Marcus Morrison. Marcus was everything Rachel was: not wealthy where she was poor, connected where she was isolated, confident in the way that only people who have never faced real adversity can be. His family's fortune stretched back generations-old Connecticut money, the kind built on smart investments, advantageous marriages, and deals made at country clubs where people like Rachel would never be welcome. He was failing his economics course when the university paired him with Rachel as a tutor. He showed up to their first session 20 minutes late, wearing a polo shirt that cost more than everything Rachel owned combined, looking at her like she was hired help. She should have walked away right then. Looking back now, with everything I know, I can see the warning signs as clearly as highway markers, the casual dismissal of her time, the way his eyes calculated her worth, based on her clothes and her laptop. The assumption that someone like her existed only to serve someone like him. But Marcus Morrison didn't become successful by lacking the ability to manipulate people. He saw something in Rachel during that first session: her intelligence, certainly, but also her beauty, her drive, her complete indifference to his wealth and status. She was different from the country club debutantes he had dated his entire life, and that difference intrigued him, so he changed tactics. He started arriving on time. He brought her coffee, remembering exactly how she liked it after being told only once. He asked about her background, her dreams, her plans for the future, and he listened to her answers with what seemed like genuine interest. He pursued her with the full force of his considerable charm, and he was very, very good at telling her exactly what she wanted to hear. "I'm not like those people," he told her one night, after she finally confessed why she kept rejecting his advances. "The rich kids who look down on everyone else. That's not who I am. Rachel, I love you for who you are, not where you came from." Here is a truth that took Rachel years to understand, a truth that many of us learn only through painful experience. The most dangerous lies are the ones that contain a grain of what we desperately want to believe. Marcus wasn't entirely lying when he said those words. In that moment, he probably believed them himself. The problem was that he had never been tested. He had never had to choose between his privilege and his principles. When that test finally came, Rachel would discover exactly how much his promises were worth. They married 5 years later at his family's country club in Greenwich, Connecticut. I stood beside her as her maid of honor, wearing a dress I had found on clearance, and altered myself, watching my best friend's face shine with a happiness that made my heart ache with joy for her. Did you know Rachel made her own wedding dress? She designed it and sewed every stitch over 6 months because Diana Morrison, Marcus's mother, refused to pay for a gown for the help. I overheard Diana saying it while I stood around a corner, not realizing anyone could hear. Trailer trash doesn't deserve Vera Wang. No matter how much perfume you spray on it, trash is still trash. I should have told Rachel. I have replayed that moment thousands of times, wondering if things might have turned out differently if I had just opened my mouth and told her the truth. But she was so happy that day, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy that happiness. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe it makes me partially responsible for everything that came after. I still don't have the answer. Part 3. The mask begins to slip. The first 2 years of their marriage seemed good from the outside. Marcus and Rachel moved into a gorgeous apartment on Manhattan's Upper East Side. He climbed the ranks at a prestigious investment firm. She found a job teaching 3rd grade at a private school, shaping young minds and coming home with stories about her students that made her entire face light up. Then Rachel discovered Marcus's gambling habit. He had lost $50,000 at a casino in Atlantic City. $50,000 in a single weekend, money they didn't have. Money he had charged against their joint credit cards and borrowed against their names without her knowledge or consent. When she confronted him, he cried. They looked like real tears. He dropped to his knees in their living room, begging for forgiveness, swearing it was a one-time mistake that would never happen again. Rachel used her inheritance to pay off his debts. Her grandmother, a woman who had worked as a housekeeper for 50 years, cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors for wealthy families who probably never learned her name, had left her $50,000, every penny of a lifetime savings. Rachel gave it all to Marcus without hesitation, without resentment, because she loved him and believed that's what a good wife was supposed to do. I told her she was out of her mind. Girl, I said, sitting in my cramped Queen's apartment, drinking wine from coffee mugs, because I had broken all my wine glasses. The only thing you should be betting on is whether he remembers your anniversary, not your retirement fund, not your grandmother's life savings. She laughed and told me I worried too much. She said Marcus had learned his lesson. She said every marriage goes through rough patches. I wanted to believe her. Around this time, something important happened, something that seemed small and insignificant, but would eventually change everything. Rachel started what she called a little hobby. She had created teaching materials for her own classroom lesson plans, worksheets, activities that her students loved, and a colleague suggested she try selling them online. Just for fun, Rachel said, a little extra money, maybe enough to pay for a vacation someday. Marcus was completely dismissive. He came home one afternoon while she was designing a lesson about butterflies and looked over her shoulder with a smirk that made my fist clench when Rachel told me about it later. That's adorable, honey, he said. You stick to teaching. Leave the business stuff to me. Rachel smiled and nodded and went back to her work. But I knew my best friend. I knew her better than anyone in the world. And I saw something flicker in her eyes when she told me that story, a spark I had never seen before. It wasn't hurt or disappointment. It was something sharper, something colder. It almost looked like calculation. Looking back, I believe that was the exact moment the shift began. That was when Rachel stopped being the naive girl from Tennessee who believed in happily ever after and started transforming into something else entirely. Something patient, something strategic, something dangerous. Part 4. The Long Game. 6 months before the funeral, Rachel invited me to lunch at a small cafe in Brooklyn, somewhere no one from their Upper East Side social circle would ever be caught dead. She was 6 months pregnant and more beautiful than I had ever seen her, with that special glow that expectant mothers sometimes have. But something was wrong. I could see it the moment I sat down, a tightness around her eyes that her smile couldn't quite mask. A tension in her shoulders that told me she wasn't sleeping, wasn't at peace. Tell me, I said, skipping the small talk. She reached into her purse and pulled out a credit card statement. Look at the charges. Third line from the bottom. It was a charge from Tiffany and Company for $4,300. He bought me jewelry, Rachel said, her voice flat. Except he never gave me any jewelry. Maybe it's a surprise. I checked everywhere. Our closet, his drawers, his home office, no jewelry box, no receipt for a future pickup. Nothing. Her eyes met mine, and what I saw in them made my stomach drop. It wasn't surprise or confusion or even anger. It was resignation, as if she had already known the answer and was just waiting for the proof to finally appear. She didn't confront Marcus immediately. That wasn't her style anymore. Instead, she hired a private investigator, a retired NYPD detective, who specialized in what he delicately called domestic surveillance. She paid him with money from her teaching materials business, which she told me was doing pretty well these days. I didn't think much about that phrase at the time. Pretty well could mean anything a few $100s a month. Enough to cover the investigator's fee without touching household accounts that Marcus watched obsessively. I was about to learn the true meaning of pretty well. The photographs arrived less than a week later. Rachel called me on a Wednesday night, her voice unnaturally calm, and asked me to come over. Marcus was working late, she said. She needed me to see something. The photos were spread across her dining room table, like evidence at a crime scene. Marcus, with a blonde woman, at a restaurant in Tribeca, their faces inches apart, his hand resting on hers across a white tablecloth. The two of them checking into a boutique hotel in Soho, walking hand in hand on a beach in Martha's Vineyard like honeymooners. The woman was Jessica Crane, 28 years old, junior associate at Marcus's firm. 87,000 Instagram followers, showcasing a lifestyle that my best friend's husband was clearly funding. How long? I asked. Not sure I wanted to know. At least 8 months. Maybe longer. It started before I got pregnant. There is something particularly cruel about betrayal during pregnancy, a time when a woman is at her most vulnerable, when she should be cherished and protected, when she is literally building new life inside her body. To be abandoned during that sacred time, to be replaced by someone younger and flashier while carrying your husband's child, it takes a special kind of cruelty that I still struggle to comprehend. We sat in silence for a long time, the photographs scattered between us. What are you going to do? I finally asked. Rachel's expression hardened in a way I had never seen before. I'm going to think. I'm going to plan. And when I finally make my move, I'm going to be ready for anything. She waited another full week before confronting him, using that time to prepare in ways I couldn't yet imagine. When she finally mentioned the affair, they were in the kitchen of their apartment. She was composed, in control, holding the photographs in her steady hand. How long has this been going on? She asked. Marcus didn't try to deny it. He didn't apologize. He didn't fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness the way he had when she discovered his gambling debts. Instead, he attacked. You've been so boring since you got pregnant, he said, and every word was a weapon. All you talk about is the baby nursery colors, pediatricians, which stroller to buy. It's exhausting. Rachel. When I come home from work, I need to be with someone who can hold a conversation about something other than your pregnancy symptoms. She stood there, 6 months pregnant, one hand instinctively protecting her belly, absorbing every cruel word. Well, Jessica understands the pressure I'm under, Marcus continued. She appreciates what I do. She doesn't complain about me working late or missing dinner. She's supportive. She's exciting. She's everything you used to be before you became this incubator. He had just called his pregnant wife an incubator, as casually as someone might comment on the weather, but Marcus wasn't finished. A dam had broken inside him, releasing years of carefully suppressed cruelty. What are you going to do about it anyway? Leave me. On what money your teacher's salary wouldn't cover rent on a studio apartment in this city? And that little craft business of yours, selling lesson plans online. That's a hobby, not income. He moved toward her, using his physical presence to intimidate. Your mother was a waitress at some roadside diner, and you're exactly like her. A nobody. A charity case I rescued from that trailer park. Everything you have, everything you are, is because of me. His voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more menacing than if he had been shouting. Do you know what will happen if you try to divorce me? I'll ruin you. You'll lose this apartment, our bank accounts, and the baby. My family has the best lawyers in New York. People who have worked for the Morrisons for generations. Your family has nothing. No money, no connections, no power. You'll waste years fighting me in court, and when it's over, you'll have nothing. You'll be exactly where you started, broke, alone, living in some miserable apartment, seeing our daughter on weekends if you're lucky. Is that really what you want? When a man tells you that you are nothing without him, he is not making a threat. He is giving you a confession. He is telling you about his deepest fear, the truth he cannot face. He is terrified that you will realize he is the one who is nothing without you. He knows that all his money and power and connections are worthless if you choose to leave him. He has built his entire identity on making you feel small. And if you ever stood at your full height, he would be exposed as the pathetic, insecure person he truly is. Rachel didn't respond. She couldn't. Her voice had been stolen by the depth of his cruelty. After Marcus left for the night to be with Jessica, presumably Rachel drove to a parking garage on Fifth Avenue and sat in her car for 2 hours, crying until there was nothing left. Her eyes swelled shut, her throat went raw, her hands ached from gripping the steering wheel. She called me from that garage, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Then she stopped crying. She took a deep breath, and in a voice that was suddenly calm and cold and absolutely terrifying, she said, "Tom, it's Rachel. It's time. Set everything in motion." Part 5. The Empire, revealed 3 days later. I learned the truth about my best friend. Rachel's little hobby was not a hobby. It was not something that earned a few $100s a month or paid for the occasional vacation. EduSpark Digital was a $47 million corporation, the largest independent teacher resource platform in the United States. It had hundreds of thousands of subscribers, partnerships with school districts nationwide, multiple revenue streams from subscriptions, licensing deals, and corporate training programs. Rachel had built the entire thing herself, piece by piece, working in the early morning hours and late at night, while Marcus assumed she was grading homework or planning lessons. She had incorporated the business in Delaware years before their marriage, placed everything in an irrevocable trust that her husband had no legal access to, hired employees, negotiated contracts, and made strategic decisions that transformed a side project into an empire. And Marcus knew absolutely nothing about it. He believed she earned maybe $200 a month from her worksheets. He believed she was nothing without him. He believed he held all the power in their relationship. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. I met Rachel and her attorney, Thomas Whitmore, at a small cafe in Brooklyn. Tom was 58 years old, with silver hair and the quiet confidence of a man who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. He had known Rachel's mother for years. Betty had kept him supplied with coffee and pie when he was a young prosecutor, working cases near her diner. And the two had maintained an unusual friendship ever since. When Rachel needed legal guidance on starting her business, she called Tom. When she needed help structuring her company to protect it from a husband she was already learning to distrust, she called Tom. And now, as she prepared to dismantle her marriage and protect herself and her unborn child, she had called Tom again. The company is secured in an irrevocable trust, Tom explained, spreading documents across the cafe table. It was created before your marriage and funded solely with your own earnings. Marcus has no legal claim to any of it. He can't access the funds, dissolve the trust, or even know about its existence unless you choose to tell him. He tapped another file. This contains records of his activities, gambling losses, financial deceptions, proof of the affair, times, places, photographs, every lie he's told you, every promise he's broken, every time he's dipped into your joint accounts without permission. I stared at the thick stack of papers. How long have you been collecting this? 6 years, Rachel said, her voice completely steady. Since the first time I discovered he was gambling, I knew something was wrong, even if I tried to deny it. So I started keeping a file, just in case. Just in case. For 8 years, she had been a wife. For 6 of those years, she had been secretly and systematically building a case against the man she married, preparing for a day she hoped would never come, but was far too intelligent not to anticipate. This is the lesson Rachel taught me about power. Real power is not loud or obvious. It does not announce itself. It builds quietly, patiently. In the shadows where no one thinks to look, real power belongs to the person who plans for every contingency while everyone else is distracted by the performance. It belongs to the woman who saves evidence while her husband believes she's harmless. It belongs to the person who plays the long game while their opponents think they've already won. There's something else, Rachel said. Something that changes everything. She laid out documents showing Marcus's plan to abandon her. He had been preparing to empty their shared accounts right after the baby was born, flee to Costa Rica with Jessica, and leave Rachel with a newborn and a mountain of debt. He had already booked plane tickets. He had a fake passport. He had been siphoning money for months in small transfers, designed not to raise any red flags. He has no idea, I know, Rachel said, and her smile was not a friendly one. He has no idea I've been a dozen moves ahead of him for years. He thinks I'm naive. He thinks I'm helpless. He thinks I have no options. She leaned forward, and her eyes were harder than I had ever seen them. That's going to be his greatest mistake. Part 6. When plans fall apart. 3 catastrophes hit in the space of 2 weeks, one after another, like dominoes set up by a cruel and uncaring hand. Each disaster was devastating on its own. Together, they nearly destroyed everything Rachel had spent years building. The first came without warning. Rachel was at her school, speaking to parents during a routine meeting about their children's reading progress. When she felt a sharp pain shoot through her abdomen, it was followed by a sudden warmth between her legs. She looked down and saw red spreading across the tile floor. The next hours were a blur of sirens, hospital corridors, and doctors speaking in urgent, grim voices. Emergency cesarean at 32 weeks. The baby was dangerously premature. The placenta had torn away. They had to operate immediately or lose them both. Hope Morrison entered the world at 4:15 p.m. on a rainy Thursday afternoon, weighing 4 pounds and 2 ounces, a tiny fighter who was immediately rushed to the neonatal intensive care unit, where tubes and monitors would keep her alive while her body learned what nature hadn't given her enough time to master. Rachel barely survived the surgery. She lost a dangerous amount of blood. Her blood pressure dropped so low that doctors weren't certain she would last the night. But she did. Because Rachel Morrison was never someone who gave up easily. When she finally woke 3 days later, weak as a newborn herself, the first thing she asked for was hope. The second thing she asked for was her phone. She couldn't execute her plan from a hospital bed. She couldn't meet with lawyers, monitor Marcus's accounts, or finalize the legal documents that would protect her daughter. Every day she spent recovering was another day for Marcus to discover what she'd been hiding, to find some way to turn the situation against her. I visited her every day, bringing magazines she never read and smoothies she could barely sip. I watched her growing more anxious as her body refused to heal on her schedule. She was supposed to be in control. She was supposed to be strong. Instead, she was trapped in a hospital bed, at the mercy of doctors and nurses, and a husband whose visits were brief and rare. That was the first catastrophe, the loss of her time, her strength, and her control. The second disaster arrived 3 days later. Diana Morrison walked into Rachel's hospital room carrying flowers and a cashmere baby blanket, dressed in an outfit of casual elegance that probably cost more than I earned in a month. She kissed Rachel's cheek with lips that had never known genuine warmth and settled into a chair as if she planned to stay a while. "I'm here to help," Diana announced. "Marcus is so overwhelmed with work, and you need someone to take care of you. We're family, after all." Rachel was too exhausted to argue, too medicated to notice the quick, hungry glances Diana shot toward her phone on the nightstand and her laptop in the bag by the window. She was too weak to recognize the predator in plain sight. I arrived at the hospital that afternoon, carrying cookies and a new book. I pushed open the door, expecting to find Rachel resting alone. Instead, I saw Diana Morrison leaning over Rachel's bedside table, scrolling through her phone with fierce concentration. Rachel was fast asleep, the machines beside her bed beeping steadily, delivering the medication that kept her sedated while her body healed. She had no idea what was happening 3 feet away. "Diana," I said sharply. She looked up, and for a split second, I saw triumph in her eyes, the look of a hunter who has finally cornered its prey. Then it vanished, replaced by an innocent smile. "Claire, honey." I was just making sure Rachel hadn't received any urgent messages. You know how she worries about her little business. She placed the phone back on the table and gathered her belongings. "I have to run, but I'll be back tomorrow. Make sure she rests." The moment she left, I grabbed Rachel's phone. The lock screen showed recently used app's email. Notes, documents all opened within the past hour. I shook Rachel awake and told her everything. The color drained from her face. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the history, confirming every app. Diana had accessed emails about the divorce, texts to Tom Whitmore, files mentioning EduSpark and its $47 million valuation. "She knows," Rachel whispered. "She knows everything." That night, Diana called Marcus and told him everything she had discovered: the secret company, the divorce papers, the evidence his wife had been gathering against him for 6 years. The next morning, Marcus descended on the hospital like a hurricane. He barged into Rachel's room while she was trying to breastfeed Hope for the first time, her body still incredibly weak, her mind hazy from medication. The baby wasn't latching, and Rachel was already crying from frustration when her husband appeared, looming over her bed with fury in his eyes. "You think you can leave me?" His voice was a venomous hiss. "You think your little teacher website is going to scare me? My mother told me everything." "Rachel?" "Everything." He leaned closer, so close she could smell the coffee on his breath. "I'll ruin you in court. I'll take Hope. My mother will testify that you're mentally unstable, that this pregnancy broke your mind, that you're an unfit mother. You'll never see your daughter again." Hospital security escorted him out 10 minutes later, after a nurse heard Rachel's sobs and came to investigate. But the damage was done. All her careful strategies, her detailed preparations, her plans for a decisive victory destroyed by her mother-in-law's betrayal and her husband's uncontrolled rage. That was the second catastrophe, the loss of her secrets, her advantage, and her element of surprise. The third catastrophe was the most devastating of all. In the days following Marcus's confrontation, Rachel's health took a sharp and unexpected downturn. The doctors said it was an infection, but they seemed puzzled by how aggressive it was. They administered powerful antibiotics, but her condition only worsened. Her fever climbed. Her organs showed signs of distress. Her recovery, which should have been progressing, was suddenly going in reverse. I started noticing something strange during Diana's daily visits. She would arrive bearing gifts of genuine concern, organic soups, soft blankets, and a special herbal tea from what she called a wellness company in Connecticut. "This is an old family recipe," Diana would say, pressing a warm mug into Rachel's trembling hands. "My grandmother swore by it. It has healing properties you just can't get from modern medicine." Rachel would drink it to keep the peace, too weak to argue. The night after Diana's third visit with the tea, Rachel's monitors began shrieking. "Code blue, crash cart to room 417. I was in the waiting room when the announcement came. I sprinted to her room and pressed my face to the window, watching in horror as a team of doctors and nurses surrounded her bed. Her heart had stopped. Her organs were shutting down. She was dying right in front of me. They brought her back twice. After the second time, they weren't confident she would survive the night, but she did, because Rachel Morrison was a fighter, and she had far too much left to do. When she finally opened her eyes the next morning, I was there, clutching her hand, as if my touch alone could keep her anchored to this world. Her eyes met mine with a clarity that cut through the haze of drugs and exhaustion. Then she spoke, 3 words that changed everything. "Diana is poisoning me." She had saved the last cup of tea Diana brought, hidden in the drawer of her nightstand. She wanted it tested at a private lab, with a fully documented chain of custody. She wanted samples of her blood and hair from the hospital, also documented. "I'm not going to survive this," Rachel said, her voice faint but steady. "I can feel it. Whatever she's giving me, it's winning. But I refuse to let them win. Not Diana, not Marcus, none of them." She made me swear to her that day. She made me promise to play the video she had recorded, to ensure everyone was watching when the truth was revealed, to protect Hope, no matter what happened. I made those promises. I meant every word. I had no idea what it would cost me to keep them. Part 7. The Final Days. Rachel was transferred to hospice care on a rainy Tuesday morning. Exactly 3 weeks after Hope's birth, the infection had spread, defeating every antibiotic. Her organs were failing slowly, shutting down one by one like a beautiful machine grinding to a halt. The doctors were baffled. A healthy 32-year-old woman shouldn't deteriorate this fast. They kept saying, there must be something they weren't seeing. I knew exactly what they were missing. I had already sent the teacup to a private lab. The results would take time. Time Rachel no longer had, but I knew what they would find. Diana Morrison had been poisoning her own daughter-in-law, slowly and systematically, with the cold patience of someone who had been planning this for years. Detective Sarah Brennan found me in the hospital cafeteria the day before Rachel was moved to hospice. She was a tough-looking woman in her mid-40s, with a weathered face and sharp eyes that come from 20 years of seeing humanity at its worst. I knew her mother, Brennan said, sitting down with a cup of terrible coffee. Betty Johnson. I worked a case near her diner years ago when I was fresh out of the academy. She was the kindest woman I ever met. She paused. Something isn't right about this situation. Healthy young mothers don't just decline like this. The medical team is stumped, which usually means they're avoiding a possibility they don't want to consider. I told her everything about the teacup, Diana's daily visits with her special herbal tea, Rachel's certainty that her mother-in-law was killing her. Brennan listened without interruption. "Get me that lab report," she said when I finished, "and any other evidence Rachel saved. If my suspicion is correct, we're going to need every single piece." Rachel spent her final days in a hospice room with a window overlooking a garden she would never walk in again. The late afternoon sun streamed through the glass, painting everything in warm golden light that seemed to mock the darkness closing in around her. I was there every day, holding her hand, talking about everything and nothing. Some days she was sharp and clear, other days she drifted, murmuring about butterflies and lesson plans and a little girl named Hope she would never watch grow up. The last time she was fully lucid, she renewed my promises. "I wrote letters," she told me, her voice barely a whisper, "for Hope. One for every birthday until she's 18. For her first day of school, her first heartbreak, her graduation, her wedding." Tears rolled down my face. "Let me finish," she said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "I wrote letters for all of it, every moment I'm going to miss. Everything I wanted to teach her. My words will be there, even when I can't be." She took a ragged breath, and I wrote other letters too. For Marcus, for Jessica, for Diana. A different kind of letter, the kind they won't be able to ignore, or deny, or pretend they never received. A faint smile touched her lips. "They think I'm dying defeated and broken. They think they won, that they got away with it all, that the girl from the trailer park finally learned her place. They have absolutely no idea what's about to happen." She paused, gathering strength. "I spent 6 years building a $47 million empire while my husband thought I was making worksheets about butterflies. I beat him in a game he never even knew he was playing. If that doesn't make me good wife material, I don't know what does." She laughed a quiet sound that turned into a coughing fit. "Promise me you'll play the video. Promise me everyone will be there to see it, especially Diana, especially Marcus, especially his Instagram princess. I promise. Promise me you'll look after Hope, that you'll raise her to be strong. Tell her about me, the real me, not the victim they'll try to make me into. Tell her that I fought for her until my last breath. I promise. Promise me. You'll finish what I started. There's a folder in Tom Whitmore's office marked Phase 2. If Marcus ever tries to threaten Hope, if he ever dares to come for what belongs to her, you open that folder and you burn his world to the ground. I promise. Rachel, I promise all of it." She passed away at 3:47 a.m. on a cold Tuesday in October. I was the only person with her, holding her hand as the monitors went flat and silence fell over the room. Her final words were a whisper I almost didn't catch. Make them watch. Claire. Every last one of them. I plan to, I whispered back, even though she was already gone. I absolutely plan to. Part 8. The Reckoning. Thomas Whitmore stood at the podium inside St. Andrew's Church, holding the envelope in his wrinkled hands. 200 people held their breath, waiting to discover what Rachel Morrison had left behind. Marcus sat in the front row with Jessica beside him, looking more annoyed than worried. He clearly thought this was just a formality, a quick reading of a will that would leave him everything as the grieving widower. He had no idea what was about to unfold. Rachel Ann Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this document to be my last will and testament. Whitmore read the introduction slowly, deliberately building suspense in a way that made even me want to scream for him to get to the point. Then he delivered the first revelation. To my daughter, Hope Elizabeth Morrison, I leave all of my shares in EduSpark Digital, a company I founded and built over the last 6 years. These shares will be held in trust, managed by my dear friend Claire Bennett, until Hope turns 25, at the time of my passing. EduSpark Digital was valued at $47 million. Current projections estimate the company will reach $80 million within 2 years. The church erupted. Marcus's head shot up, confusion twisting into terror. That's impossible. She sold teaching plans online. She made maybe $200 a month. Whitmore looked down at him with patient disdain. Mrs. Morrison was the sole owner and chief executive officer of EduSpark Digital, the largest platform for independent teacher resources in the United States. The company was founded before your marriage, structured to be completely separate from marital assets. I have 6 years of documentation proving Mrs. Morrison built this business entirely on her own, without a single dollar from you. Diana Morrison leaped to her feet. This is fraud. She was hiding assets. The company was created before the marriage and funded solely by her own earnings. Perfectly legal. I suggest you sit down. Mrs. Morrison. Marcus tried to regain his composure. Fine. As Hope's father, I'll manage her trust until she's an adult. Whitmore didn't blink. I haven't finished, Mr. Morrison. I believe the next part will address your assumption about parental rights. He clicked a button on a small remote. A large screen descended behind the coffin, and Rachel's face filled the display filmed from her hospice bed just days before her death. She looked terrible, thin and pale, dark circles under her eyes, body clearly failing, but her eyes were bright with fierce, almost playful intelligence. Hello, Marcus, Jessica, Diana. If you're seeing this, it means I'm gone, and you're probably feeling very pleased with yourselves right now. The church went silent. Surprised about the money, of course, but you're already thinking you'll figure it out. Get custody of Hope. Take control of the trust. Find some legal loophole. You think you've won. You always think you've won. Because people like you can't even comprehend a world where someone like me could possibly outsmart you. She paused, and a small smile appeared that sent chills down my spine. You have no idea what's coming. So sit down, shut your mouths, and listen closely. Class is in session. The video continued, and with every word, the world that Marcus, Jessica, and Diana had built began to crack. Jessica, Rachel said, I want to thank you. When I first discovered you were sleeping with my husband, I was shattered. I cried for 3 days. I thought my life was over, that everything I'd worked for had been destroyed by a 28-year-old Instagram influencer who couldn't respect another woman's marriage. She paused, and her smile became razor sharp. But then I got angry. And after I got angry, I got smart. When I started investigating Marcus's secrets, really investigating, I discovered something fascinating about my own life. Something I'd never thought to question. Documents flashed on the screen, DNA test results with lab letterhead, and clinical data. Marcus Hope is not your daughter. Chaos erupted. People shouted, gasped, jumped from their seats. Marcus's face went white, his mouth hanging open. I had an affair, too. Rachel's voice continued calmly. Just once, 3 years ago, right after I discovered your gambling debts. I met someone at an education conference who treated me with kindness, who saw me as a person instead of a trophy, who actually listened when I spoke instead of waiting for his turn to talk. She shrugged slightly on the screen. I'm not proud of it. I was raised to believe marriage vows meant something. But I'm not sorry either. The DNA test is attached to my will, witnessed and notarized. You have no biological claim to Hope, no parental rights, no legal claim to custody. The man who is her biological father will be contacted by my attorney. Whether he chooses to be involved is up to him and my daughter. Marcus looked physically ill. Beside him, Jessica had gone still. Now for Diana, my dear mother-in-law. Diana flinched as if slapped. Detective Brennan, I know you're here. I asked Tom to invite you personally. I watched Brennan move through the crowd, badge already in hand. I believe Diana Morrison has been poisoning me. It was in the herbal tea she brought to my hospital room every day. I saved the last cup. It's currently being held as evidence by Mr. Whitmore. I also saved samples of my blood and hair from the hospital. The test results should come back any day now. I suspect they'll show high levels of thallium, a heavy metal that mimics natural illness and is nearly impossible to detect without specific testing. Diana's voice rose to a screech. This is insane. She was paranoid. I never poisoned anyone. On screen, Rachel seemed to have anticipated this exact outburst. Diana will probably say I was mentally unstable, but I was a straight A student, a national merit scholar. I built a $47 million company while everyone thought I was making worksheets about butterflies. Does that sound like someone who has lost her grip on reality? The third bombshell hit like a physical blow. Marcus, let's talk about your work. Let's discuss the $2.3 million in gambling debts you owe to some very unpleasant people in Atlantic City. And let's talk about the embezzlement you've been committing at your firm to cover those debts. Documents flashed across the screen, bank records, wire transfers, betting slips, a paper trail winding through shell companies and offshore accounts. I've already sent copies to the SEIC, the FBI, the IRS, and your firm's ethics board. By Monday, you won't have a law license. By Friday, you'll probably be in handcuffs. And those gentlemen in Atlantic City who've been waiting for their money, they'll be very interested to learn their debtor can no longer pay. Marcus was shaking visibly now, sweat breaking out on his forehead. Oh, and Jessica, one more thing. Jessica, who had been slowly inching away from Marcus, froze. I know you've been selling Marcus's insider trading secrets to Greg Holloway, his biggest rival. I have the emails, the Venmo payments, the text messages where you called Marcus a useful idiot who's too arrogant to realize he's being played. The screen showed text conversations. Jessica's face crumbled completely. Marcus, your mistress has been destroying your career from the inside while you were busy trying to destroy me. She's been feeding your enemy every piece of valuable information you were foolish enough to share. You thought she loved you. She just thought you were a stepping stone. Marcus spun toward Jessica. You were working for Greg. Marcus, I can explain. You were selling my information. I could go to prison because of you. Oh, that's rich. Jessica's composure shattered. You're the one who embezzled millions. You're the one with gambling debts. I just made sure I'd be taken care of when you inevitably screwed everything up. They screamed at each other in the front pew, while 200 people watched and dozens of phones recorded. My best friend's funeral had become the most dramatic reality show any of them had ever witnessed. Never underestimate a quiet woman, Rachel's voice said, cutting through the chaos. Still waters don't just run deep. Sometimes they're hiding a tsunami, and sometimes that tsunami has spent 6 years learning exactly where all the fault lines are. Part 9. Justice delivered police cars pulled up to St. Andrew's Church less than 20 minutes after Rachel's video ended. Detective Brennan had called for backup before the second bombshell dropped. She knew what was coming and was ready to act. Diana Morrison was escorted from the church in handcuffs, her screams echoing off the vaulted ceilings. She tried to invoke her family name, her lawyers, her connections in Connecticut society. None of it mattered. The officer guiding her toward the squad car looked completely unimpressed by her protests. The lab results came back 2 days later. Thallium. Just as Rachel predicted, a slow-acting poison that builds up in the body over time. Mimicking infection and organ failure. Diana had been administering it for weeks, possibly months, with the cold precision of premeditated murder. She would spend the rest of her life in prison. Marcus was served with federal subpoenas before he could leave the church. The SEC, the FBI, the IRS. His firm fired him by end of business that day, issuing a press release that called him a disgrace to the legal profession and an embarrassment to our institution. His assets were frozen pending investigation. The tickets to Costa Rica in his desk drawer would never be used. And when the gambling creditors came looking 3 days later, Marcus was safely in federal custody, denied bail as a flight risk. Men like that have long memories, and Marcus had nowhere left to hide. Jessica Crane was arrested on 17 counts insider trading, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, accessory to financial crimes. Her mugshot went viral within hours. Mascara running, designer dress wrinkled, the perfect facade finally crumbling. Her Instagram followers dropped from 87,000 to under 8,000 overnight. The comments were brutal. This is what happens when you trade your morals for a married man. Imagine losing everything for a guy who was already losing it all. She really thought she was the main character. Plot twist, she was the cautionary tale. Part 10. New Beginnings. 2 weeks after the funeral, Greg Holloway contacted me through Tom Whitmore. When we met, he seemed nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup in a way that didn't match the ruthless businessman Marcus had always described. I loved her, he said quietly. Rachel, we only had 3 months together, but I really loved her. She was the most incredible woman I'd ever met. Smart, strong, funny. She had no idea how extraordinary she really was. He showed me a photograph, Rachel, on a beach somewhere, laughing at the camera, hair blowing in the wind. She looked happier than I'd seen her in years. I didn't know about hope, Greg said. Not until the funeral and the DNA test. Rachel never told me she was pregnant with my child. I think she was trying to protect me. Or maybe protect herself. She knew what Marcus would do if he found out. His eyes glistened. I want to be part of Hope's life. I want to help raise her, give her everything Rachel would have wanted. Not because of the money or the inheritance because she's my daughter, and loving her is the only way I have left to love her mother. I studied him across the table, this man Rachel had chosen, if only briefly, if only in secret. I saw what she must have seen: kindness, authenticity, someone real in a world full of men like Marcus Morrison. Hope needs a father, I said finally, someone who will love her for who she is, not what she represents. Can you be that person? Yes, he said without hesitation. I can. I will. I promise you. A year passed. Life pushed forward, even when grief made every day feel like a struggle. I passed the bar exam on my first attempt and became a licensed attorney. Fueled by Rachel's memory and a sense of purpose I'd never known before, as Hope's guardian, the trust provided a salary enough to stop worrying about rent and start building the future Rachel would have wanted. Hope was thriving, a happy, healthy 1-year-old with her mother's eyes and Greg's warm smile. She found joy in everything, laughing and reaching for the world with a pure delight that made me understand why Rachel had fought so hard. My daughter Lily, now 9, appointed herself Hope's official big sister, reading bedtime stories, helping with bath time, telling anyone who would listen that her baby sister was the smartest, most beautiful child in the entire world. Greg relocated to New York, renting an apartment 2 floors above mine, close enough to be a constant presence in Hope's life, without crowding the unique family we were building. We weren't romantic partners. Our bond was something different, perhaps stronger. We were teammates in the most important work either of us would ever do. EduSpark continued to expand, now valued at $80 million, with projections to hit $100 million within the year. The new CEO had been personally selected by Rachel. Following meticulous instructions she'd left behind, she also established an endowment for scholarships for the children of single mothers, named the Betty Johnson Fund after the woman who had spent her life working so her daughter could have opportunities she never did. Betty was finally living comfortably in Tennessee, retired from the diner, tending her garden, and video calling her granddaughter every Sunday. We kept Hope's first birthday party small but perfect. My apartment was filled with pink balloons and a banner Lily had made with enthusiastic, uneven letters. Happy first birthday, Hope. Just a handful of guests: Lily, Greg, Betty, Tom Whitmore, the people who had loved Rachel and would now love her daughter. I rolled a small television into the living room and explained that Rachel had left videos for Hope, one for every major milestone until she turned 18. First birthday, first day of school, first heartbreak, graduation, wedding day. A hush fell over the room. Rachel's face appeared on screen, filmed in her hospice bed. She'd put on lipstick, fixed her hair, tried to look like herself even as her body was failing. You could see the medical equipment in the background, but she'd framed the shot to push it aside. That was so like Rachel, concerned with how things looked, right up to the very end. "My darling Hope," she began, her voice fragile but warm. "Happy first birthday, baby girl. If you're watching this, it means I'm not there to hold you, kiss your cheeks, or watch you smear cake all over your beautiful face." She smiled, and for a moment, she looked almost healthy. "I'm so sorry I couldn't stay. I fought so hard, Hope harder than I've ever fought for anything. But some battles can't be won. Sometimes being a fighter means knowing when to let go and trusting the people you love to carry on the work you started." Her eyes shone, but she didn't let herself cry. "I need you to know something important. Everything I ever accomplished, everything that truly mattered, I did it for you. I didn't build a company because I loved money or success. I built it to protect you. I knew there would be people who would try to take what belongs to you, who would see you as an opportunity. I wanted you to have armor, resources, independence. So when you choose to let people into your heart, it will be because you want them there, not because you have no other choice. She took a shaky breath. Be brave. Hope. Be kind. Be smart. Work hard. But never so hard you forget how to laugh. Love with your whole heart, but never so much you lose yourself. Stand up for those who can't stand for themselves. Question everything, especially when people tell you not to ask questions. Her eyes locked onto the camera, staring through the screen, across time and death itself. And hope. This is the most important thing I'll ever tell you. Never let anyone make you believe you are nothing without them. You are everything. You are my everything. You are the daughter of Rachel Morrison, and that means you have a strength inside you that even you can't imagine. I will love you forever. Happy birthday, sweetheart. The video ended. The room was filled with tears. Betty sobbed into her tissue. Greg held Hope tightly, whispering into her hair. Even Tom Whitmore was dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. Lily pressed her face into my side. She's not really gone, is she? Mama? I held her close. No, baby. As long as Hope has these videos, she's never really gone at all. Part 11. The Final Move. A letter arrived at my law office 3 days later. No return address. Federal prison postmark. My hands were steady as I opened it. Nothing Marcus could say could hurt me anymore. Claire, this isn't over. My lawyers are investigating the DNA evidence. Something doesn't feel right. And as soon as I prove Hope is my daughter, I'm coming for custody. I'm coming for the trust. I'm coming for everything Rachel stole from me. See you in court, Marcus. A year ago, a letter like this would have thrown me into panic, but I had spent 12 months learning to think like Rachel, to plan for every contingency, to gather arsenals of information, to be ready for exactly this moment. I picked up the phone. Tom, it's Claire. He sent a letter. Yes, he's threatening custody. I know Rachel was ready for this. I opened the top drawer of my desk. Inside was a thick folder I had never touched, labeled in Rachel's neat handwriting, Phase 2, if he threatens, Hope. Open, only if necessary. I broke the seal and began to read. There were documents, photographs, audio recordings, a USB drive labeled Insurance, and tucked inside, a handwritten note from my best friend Claire. If you're reading this, Marcus is still trying to fight. Some men never learn. They get knocked down and get right back up, not because they think they can win, but because fighting is the only way they know how to live. Phase 1 was the funeral, the public revelations, his arrest, the complete humiliation. I hoped that would be enough. I really hoped he would crawl away and leave Hope alone. But I knew him, Claire, better than anyone, better than he knows himself. That's why I prepared Phase 2. He has absolutely no idea what I discovered during those 6 years, what I saved, what I held back for this exact moment. He thinks the funeral was the end. He thinks I played all my cards. He's so wrong. Finish him. Claire, do it for me. For Hope. For every woman who was ever told she was nothing without the man who was tearing her apart. Love always, Rachel P. S. Tell Hope her mama says hi, and tell Marcus. Checkmate. A smile spread across my face, the same fierce, confident smile Rachel had worn in her video. I began reviewing the folder's contents, names, dates, evidence of crimes that made everything revealed at the funeral look like minor traffic violations, enough to lock Marcus away for decades. shatter what remained of his reputation, and guarantee he would never threaten hope again. Outside my window, the city stretched in every direction, millions of lives playing out their own stories, somewhere in federal custody. Marcus Morrison was probably congratulating himself on his threatening letter, believing he still had moves to make. He was deeply mistaken. Rachel had made certain of that. I picked up the phone to call Tom Whitmore to set Phase 2 into motion, to finish what my best friend had started. Justice is patient. I thought, remembering the words that had appeared on screen at the end of Rachel's memorial. But she never forgets, and neither would I. The lessons Rachel. Left behind, this story is not just about revenge, though Rachel's revenge was spectacular and complete. It is not just about justice, though justice was served in ways that few could have imagined. This story is about something deeper, truths that apply to every person who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told they are nothing without someone else. The first lesson is about the power of silence. We live in a world that celebrates loudness, the person who speaks most confidently, who commands the most attention, who dominates every room they enter, but there is a different kind of power that belongs to those who watch, who listen, who learn, while others are busy performing. Rachel understood this. For 6 years, she built an empire in plain sight while everyone around her saw only a harmless teacher making worksheets about butterflies. Her silence was not weakness, it was strategy. The second lesson is about preparation. Rachel did not wait until disaster struck to protect herself. From the moment she sensed something was wrong with her marriage, she began documenting, planning, building a safety net that would eventually save her daughter. She hoped she would never need it. She prepared as if she definitely would. This is the difference between wishing for the best and being ready for the worst. The third lesson is about self-worth. When Marcus told Rachel she was nothing without him, he revealed his own deepest fear that without the power to diminish her, he would be exposed as the small, insecure man he truly was. Every person who has ever been told they are worthless needs to understand this truth. The people who try hardest to make you feel small are the ones most threatened by your potential greatness. Their cruelty is a confession of their own inadequacy. The fourth lesson is about the long game. In a world obsessed with instant gratification, Rachel played a different game entirely. 6 years of patience, 6 years of careful planning, 6 years of watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. This is not natural for most of us. We want immediate results, immediate justice, immediate vindication. But some victories can only be won by those willing to endure the long, difficult middle by those who understand that timing is everything. The fifth lesson is about legacy. Rachel knew she was dying. She knew she would never see her daughter take her first steps, speak her first words, graduate from school, fall in love, get married. So she did the only thing she could. She left letters, videos, and resources that would continue to guide and protect hope long after she was gone. This is perhaps the most profound form of love, caring so deeply about someone's future that you prepare for it, even when you know you won't be there to see it. The sixth and final lesson is about justice. Rachel did not seek revenge for its own sake. She sought accountability. She wanted the people who had wronged her to face the consequences of their choices, not because she was bitter, but because she understood that unpunished cruelty only breeds more cruelty. Diana needed to answer for murder. Marcus needed to answer for theft and betrayal. Jessica needed to answer for her complicity. without consequences. People like them would simply move on to their next victims. A call to action. If you have read this far, something in Rachel's story has spoken to you. Perhaps you recognized yourself in her quiet determination. Perhaps you saw someone you love in her struggle. Perhaps you simply needed a reminder that the meek can indeed inherit the earth, or at least bring down the powerful people who underestimated them. Here's what I want you to take from this story. If you are being told you are nothing without someone else, know that you are being lied to. The person saying those words is trying to keep you small because your growth threatens their power. They see your potential more clearly than you do, and it terrifies them. If you are in a difficult situation, start preparing, document everything, save evidence, build resources, create a safety net, hope for the best, but be ready for the worst. You may never need these preparations, but if you do need them and don't have them, it will be too late. If you have been patient and strategic, trust your timing. The world will try to rush you into action before you're ready. People will question your silence, your restraint, your apparent acceptance of injustice. But you know something they don't. You are not accepting anything. You are positioning yourself. You are waiting for the perfect moment. And when that moment comes, you will be ready. If you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it with them. Sometimes a story is the only thing standing between a person and despair. Sometimes knowing that someone else fought and won is enough to give someone the courage to keep fighting. And finally, remember this. Never underestimate a quiet woman. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never assume that someone who seems powerless cannot become the most dangerous person in the room. Rachel Morrison taught us that, and her lesson will echo through time, carried by a daughter who will grow up knowing exactly how much she was loved, protected by a woman who refused to let death itself stop her from keeping her promises. The quiet ones are always the ones to watch. Never forget it. This story is dedicated to every person who has been underestimated, dismissed, or told they were nothing. You are everything. You just haven't shown them yet. The end. Disclaimer. This story is created solely for educational and informational purposes. It aims to provide relationship guidance and awareness, not to target or identify any individual. The events and characters depicted are entirely fictional, intended for entertainment and learning. Our content is advertiser-friendly and does not promote hate, offense, or harm in any form. The goal is to help viewers gain insights and make informed decisions based on life experiences.